Why would anyone buy a mini PC? Well, for one thing, with a weight and volume similar to a laptop, but a keener price to performance ratio, mini PCs can be an interesting option for situations where space and money are limited. Hi, it's Dave T here, and I purchased this MINISFORUM Venus Series UM790PRO mini PC as an alternative to the laptop I was using for when I travel and need to edit video footage. That's because I recently changed to a camera that records in 4K 10-bit and my previous laptop just couldn't handle that type of footage. If you are short on space and need a computer with more power or interfaces than your typical laptop, but don't need the standalone options a laptop gives you, then a mini PC like the UM790PRO could be an option for you. Now, if you're not familiar with mini PCs, they are basically very similar to desktop computers, but much smaller. They generally use ITX formats such as Mini, Nano and Pico ITX, which are around 6 inches or less square. MINISFORUM don't explicitly state the board specification, but in terms of size it is a touch smaller than the Nano ITX specification. For my use when I'm travelling for filming, I'm generally in the van, so I was already using a separate monitor and keyboard and mouse, and rarely if ever used the laptop elsewhere. So it was an option for getting a powerful PC that was small and light enough for my needs, but much less cost-wise than a comparable laptop. So that's my reasoning behind purchasing the UM790PRO. Now let's look at what you get in the box. The UM790PRO comes in standard MINISFORUM packaging, which is a simple, almost cube-shaped box with some black foam protective block for the PC itself. It's pretty minimal, so apart from that non-recyclable foam and a few cellophane wrappers, it's fairly ecologically sound. The top of the PC is only protected by a slim piece of foam and the box itself, so a little bit more protection there would have been desirable. In the box you get the mini PC, a backplate and screws for attaching to VESA mounts, some spare feet, a fairly short HDMI cable, 120 watt PSU with a 1.1 meter power supply cable, and in my case a UK power cable. And of course some documentation and manuals, but they are a little bit light on the technical detail. The main reason for choosing any mini PC is of course the small form factor. The UM790PRO's pretty much all metal case measures just 130mm by 126mm and is just 52mm tall. This allows it to sit on pretty much any desk without taking up much space. It also comes complete with a VESA mounting plate which bolts to two 4mm threaded holes on the base of the unit and allows it to be mounted on the back of a VESA compliant monitor. That is providing of course that the monitor is not already mounted onto a VESA bracket. I actually 3D printed this small caddy frame for mounting the mini PC under a shelf in the van. The top of the UM790 is a blank plate with the MINISFORUM logo, whilst there are vents on both the right and left sides and also on the base. So keep that in mind when considering locations to ensure good airflow. The rear side is pretty much full of I/O ports as well as one more vent along the top. From left to right there's a 19.5 5.2 by 2.1mm round power point, two full-size HDMI ports capable of outputting 4K at 144Hz, an RJ45 2.5 gig Ethernet port and four USB-free Gen 2 Type A ports. The front panel is refreshingly clean with a power button, two USB Type-C ports and a 3.5mm stereo audio jack, and also a built-in microphone, and I'll let you be the judge of the quality of this mic. In case you are wondering, the other tiny hole on the front of the panel is a CMOS reset button. Now, providing two USB-C ports is certainly welcome, but it would have been better to have at least one of them on the rear panel. This is especially true bearing in mind that the UM790PRO supports USB-C PD power delivery both in and out. By positioning both of these ports on the front panel, it means that if you want to or need to power it via PD, then you will have cables on both the front and the back of the device. Apart from looking untidy, this is especially undesirable having a critical cable like its power supply so easily accessible if used on a desk. In total though, this gives you 6 USB ports and the ability to run two monitors direct from the PC without having to add any external hubs. My main reason for specifically choosing the UM790PRO was for its performance. At its heart there is an AMD Ryzen9 7940HS 8-core processor. With 16 meg of cache and running at up to 5.2 GHz, this performs well when running in Adobe Premiere to process that 10-bit Canon video format. From a general use perspective, startup is fairly rapid, taking just 20 seconds from pressing the power button to getting the Windows 11 startup screen. From a general feel perspective, the machine is pretty snappy to use. In Adobe, the smoothness of scrubbing the timeline is similar to my main editing rig. In terms of less subjective benchmark figures, the Passmark CPU benchmark figure is a respectable 31,177. In a direct rendering comparison with my albeit 4-year-old Ryzen9 3900X 12-core powered tower, a sample project took almost twice as long to render. But rendering times on Premiere can be quite inconsistent, so I wouldn't always read too much into that direct comparison. And also, graphics card compatibility, specifically with certain effects, can have a drastic impact on performance in terms of rendering times compared to the actual processor itself. The onboard graphics is actually the AMD Radeon 780M. This supports AV1 and H.265 video encoding and decoding, which could improve rendering performance if using those formats. It has a Passmark 3D graphics score of 7856, which is half the score of my RTX 2060. A card which is coincidentally almost literally double the physical size of the entire UM790 case. The installed M.2 PCIe 4 solid state drive is very fast with a Passmark figure of 32824, but there are faster. Now, MINISFORUM, as far as I can tell, have a policy of not stating the exact models of components used for RAM and SSDs, which is not unusual. So if you need the absolute fastest drive possible, then you may want to purchase a bare bones model and fit your own choice of drive. Bearing in mind though that you would then also need to source the OS license and potentially RAM, so of course you could also just swap out the provided SSD. Either way, there are more options that are simpler to do than with most laptops. Looking inside the UM790 requires the removal of all 4 of the stuck-on rubber feet to access the 4 case screws. This is not difficult, but I would rather access did not require the removal of what are essentially one-time fit components. MINISFORUM do, to be fair, provide some spare feet, but I just rather the feet were positioned so that the case screws were not obscured. Take care if you're doing this, because removing the base plate requires the disconnection of a power wire to the lower fan. This fan and heatsink actually acts to cool the 2 M.2 2280 PCIe SSD card slots. This is a welcome feature considering the compact size of the unit and that PCIe 4 SSDs can run hot. In its standard configuration, one of the M.2 PCIe 4 slots is actually taken up with a half-length Wi-Fi card. So if you are looking to add a second drive, then you will need to use the RJ45 Ethernet connector or provide alternative external USB Wi-Fi support. In terms of RAM, a maximum of 64 GB is supported in 2 DDR5 dual-channel SO DIMM slots running up to 5600 MHz. Unlike some mini PCs, there's no SATA support, so adding any non-M.2 SSDs will need to be achieved with via either USB or potentially with an M.2 SATA adapter and some creative external cabling. By the way, Bluetooth 5.3 is supported. The 790 comes with a fairly substantial but neat looking 120 watt power supply, which is comfortably over the 790's stated 65 watt requirement. In standard configuration, this powers the PC via the 5.5 by 2.1mm round jack. However, as previously mentioned, you can use the front USB-C ports to power the unit from any compatible USB power source, providing that it can deliver at least 65 watts. This is a really useful feature if you need to power the PC somewhere that mains power is not available, as it means that you can use things like this 12-volt USB PD power adapter or a sufficiently sized USB PD power bank. Or in the event that you wish to operate the mini PC in 2 locations, then you could of course purchase a USB PD power supply for one location and then use the provided power supply in the other location to save having to move it when you move the PC. My initial test of powering via PD had mixed results. I already owned a 12-volt 65 watt USB PD power adapter from Baseus, but despite being the correct rating, this would not negotiate power with the UM790. To give some more headroom, I purchased a Ugreen 130 watt USB PD 12-volt charger, which has a maximum 100 watt USB PD output. Now this negotiated power and worked, however, it seemed unstable when the PC was under load, for example whilst rendering a project where it would just suddenly power off. A subsequent test with a much more expensive mains power Ugreen Nexode 200 watt USB charger worked fine with no issues at all. But then, to complicate my findings, a desktop test of the Ugreen 100 watt charger, that's the one that failed before, running from a mains powered 12-volt power supply also worked fine, as you can see in this rather shaky handheld footage of that test. The initial test issues may have been related to the 12-volt system that I was actually running from, and to be honest, USB PD can sometimes be a bit fussy with adapters. My recommendation would be to try different USB PD chargers and cables, find one that definitely works, and then stick with that. Alternatively, you can get the simple USB PD to 5.5 2.1 barrel adapters, which allow you to power via the rear jack but from a USB PD charger. The UM790 Pro, like most of the mini PC models from MINISFORUM, comes preloaded with Windows 11 Standard but not Pro. If you want or require any of the additional features that Windows Pro offers, then you can of course upgrade through Microsoft. I have seen some talk online about possible preloaded malware infecting mini PCs and other low-cost Chinese computers in general. Now, I haven't seen any evidence cases reported online in relation to MINISFORUM specifically. And in terms of my unit, there was only a standard Windows 11 install with no additional bloatware, other than the stuff that Microsoft adds, and all virus scans came back clean. Now, if you do want to be extra cautious, you can of course download a Windows 11 install, grab the license key off the pre-installed version, and then install that to guarantee that it's completely clean. I have now had the UM790 Pro for a couple of months, and generally, apart from that one USB PD issue, I've not had any operating issues with it at all. But it's worth noting that it's not my daily driver in terms of machines. In terms of minor complaints and niggles, the first, albeit minor one, is those rubber feet. To be fair though, unless you need to open the case, it won't be a major concern for most people. A more important design issue that I've already mentioned is those USB-C ports, which are, by the way, the only USB 4 ports and therefore the fastest, and of course front mounted. Front mounted USB ports on this form factor do make sense, since it is likely to be desk based, and so having things like mice or keyboards etc. cabled directly from the front PC towards the user seems sensible. But then mice and keyboards don't warrant USB 4 speeds, and as mentioned before, powering the PC with a front mounted cable on a desktop was a bit of a disaster waiting to happen. The only serious issue I have had is, to be completely fair, not with this specific MINISFORUM PC, or even this model. I previously ordered and received a UM690 Pro, which is a slightly lower spec model. It's a similar design to the 790 physically, and the one I had seemed to be very sensitive to electrostatic shocks, in terms of both giving them when the case was touched, but more worryingly, shutting down completely at the time of the shock. Now, I've not had any similar issues at all with the 790, and I could find no mention of this issue at all online. It was difficult to say if the static was generated naturally, in other words by me, or by the PC, but more concerning was the fact that a single static discharge to the case could shut down the PC. I've worked with a lot of PCs in my time, going back to the very earliest ones in the 80s, but I've never experienced a PC being quite that sensitive to static. But as I say, that was not an issue I found with the 790, and it could have just been a one-off issue with that 690 model, but I thought it's worth mentioning. So in conclusion, I am generally very happy with the UM790 Pro. The case is as aesthetically pleasing as it is small, and on a daily basis it sits unobtrusively on the corner of my desk, connected to the network and to my KVM switch, so that I can easily access it at a moment's notice. This makes transferring files to and from the mini PC when travelling much more convenient than with the previous laptop. When travelling, it is easy to pack and carry in a case that, even along with the PSU, a wireless keyboard and a mouse, has similar volume but more convenient dimensions than a small laptop case. In use in the van, I have a setup with a full-size monitor, keyboard and mouse with comparable performance to my full home rig, and all at a fraction of the cost of a laptop equivalent. I hope you found this video helpful or interesting, and if you have, then please do hit that like button. And if you're interested in seeing other tech and gear related videos, then please do consider subscribing to my channel. But most of all, thanks for watching.